All right. Welcome everybody to the Critical Conversations podcast series. This is our third episode and our second attempt at a live podcast recording. And so we appreciate all of you for being here today, for everyone who's joined us on Zoom, as well as everyone who's here in our live studio audience. Thank you for taking the time to be here. We have a phenomenal show planned for you today. And I am so excited about all of the panelists that have been able to join us. And I'm looking forward to the conversation that we will have. So welcome again, everybody, to Critical Conversations. Episode 3, the title of our topic today is Who Switched My Code? An intersectional look at code switching and the impact on cross-cultural relationships. For those who don't know, my name is Dr. Rick Daniels. I serve as the Director of Institutional Equity and Inclusion here at Oakton College, and I'm excited to be here with everybody today. We have a very exciting and dynamic panel that is going to be joining us. I want to take some time to ask them to introduce themselves. So if you can give us your first name, last name, and the area of the college that you represent, and then we'll get started with the show.
Hello, I'm Janine Jackson, Equity Coordinator for Black Student Success. I support Black students on both of our campuses here in Des Plaines and in Skokie. And thank you for inviting me to be one of the panelists.
Hi, I'm Rondell Merrill. I am an adjunct in sociology. I also co-chair the LGBTQIA2+ Advisory Council.
Hello, I'm Kamari Jordan, and I'm the marketing specialist in marketing and communications.
Hello, my name is Will Crawford. I'm a professor of English at Oakton. Thank you for the invite.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Camesha Richardson. I'm Director of Human Resources here at Oakton.
All right, so the description of today's topic reads, code switching is an intersectional and cross-cultural phenomenon that has existed for many generations. While some argue that it's a healthy and common cultural practice, others see it as a dangerous balancing act that results in unbearable mental, emotional, and even physical stress. Today's episode addresses the complex idea of code switching and explores such concepts as whole self versus authentic self in the workplace, professionalism as a racial construct, and strategies for fostering an inclusive campus culture. We're going to begin today by listening to a brief but very powerful spoken word poem by Janine Clark Owens entitled Code Switching at Voices in Power in Philadelphia. Let's check it out and we'll come back and talk about it.
Because my name is Janine Clark Owens, and this is not my voice. This is not my normal register. This is a choice. This cadence creeps unconsciously into my vocal box cavity, and all of a sudden my voice begins to lift, wraps up my vocal cords and presents them to you like a gift, making my voice higher and sweeter, thus more pleasing to your ear palate, instead of rough, harsh sounds that play on your eardrums with a mallet. Yeah, this is not how I would normally sound. Wow, I didn't even realize I was actually trying to hold the real me down, to suppress me so that you can trust me. I wonder if my voice is so high you can't hear the irony. I do it automatically. I just pop this voice in without thinking. The same way you would pop on a life vest if you were sinking. It saves me from being too Harlem, too deep, too black. But girl, you was all of that. This voice is too fly to be left sitting in the cut like a cul-de-sac, waiting for a friend, a family member, your cousin. Why can't the voice you use with an employer be the same one you use with your husband? Because as a woman, we are conditioned from birth to be meek, taught that the man should have the most strength, so we even make our voices weak. Because as a black person, we are taught from birth to be non-threatening, so we quiet the bass of the African drum that strums our vocal cords until the silence is deafening. Because as a female who is black, we are labeled angry black woman, and even when we're not, we get the name even still. So we Kenny G. R. Louis Armstrongs until we sound tranquil. like a tranquilizer gun, temporarily sedating your true self so you may be easily handled. True self on mute, but this voice matters too. Hands up, don't shoot. This voice has roots in New York City. It's gritty, knows that life is not always pretty, but it is ever beautiful in its boldness, never drowning in self-pity. This voice is indicative of where you are from, but that should have no relevance because your home of Harlem should not be indicative of your level of intelligence. Habitually, we are taught that our blackness cannot enter white spaces without a code, without code switching. Without it, their minds will be glitching, trying to compute our vernacular, but this voice is spectacular. It is the purest form of your articulated thoughts, like rainwater after impurities have been vaporized. That other voice is not the real thing, just poorly plagiarized you, universalized you. Stop treating your voice like the cat that disappears when company's around, boo. But I know you feel most vocally comfortable when you're around your best friends. Finger waves become commas, and claps encapsulate words like bookends. But you can't just roll your neck and refuse to articulate in a professional setting. Why not? But it's okay to upspeak so that everything sounds like a question, I'm betting. Why? Because it makes you sound ghetto, uneducated. I don't think that's a big mystery. Ghetto, that is a leftover ancestral sound from the clicking languages found in the Southern African tribes. That is my history. Well, you can't always show all your cards. Sometimes you need your poker face. But this face is black 24/7. I can't turn it on and off based on time and place. This voice is yours, so own it. Stand up for its validity in powerful places. Be its proponent. Well, maybe I won't go full Harlem Bird, but I'll let my voice fly. Breaking this ingrained habit will be difficult, but I'll give it a try. So, hi. Hi. My name is Janine Clark Owens, and this is my voice. Voice. Love it or hate it, that is your choice. Thank you.
So let's take some reactions to that. That was quite a powerful poem, spoken word, and there were a number of different aspects that made me think. So I just want to open up the panel to get some general reactions to it. You all had the chance to watch it ahead of time. So tell me a little bit about what your immediate reactions were to the spoken word.
I wanted to, when I first heard it, I wanted to cry, partly in sadness, but also partly in joy. It was just truly, truly powerful. First of all, she's expressing an experience that I'll never have. I'm a white woman, so I come to this world with privilege because of the color of my skin. But at the same time, I'm a woman, so I've still experienced a lot of those same things she talks about, and it just, I want to cry because I felt it, but I want to celebrate with her at the same time as she reclaims her voice.
When I first saw this, I thought, I was conflicted. I felt like when I do that, they were both the same person. In fact, when I introduced myself on the podcast, I saw this the second time. I said, oh my gosh, I did the voice, Janine Jackson, equity coordinator, making sure that my voice was clear, articulate, and soothing. But I think she asked a question, well, why can't I basically be my authentic self, be the person I am with my husband, and the same, why can't I bring that to my job? I think you can be both. She can be both. But I think it depends on the journey in which a person and experience that they're going through to determine who can show up.
Immediately, I connected with her experience, but I also thought about what environment I find myself in most often. And it's actually an environment where I am encouraged to bring my entire self. I think it's very specific to what I do here and the institution I'm a part of, but I am encouraged to share pieces of myself and my culture and my heritage. And I know when people hear that, they're like, okay, well, job's done. You don't have to code switch then. But actually, I think the people who encourage me to show up to those spaces as my whole self and share those things, they understand the benefits of it. They understand how we all benefit from it, but they don't quite understand what it looks like, what it sounds like, and totally what it means to show up in these spaces as yourself. And also, there's no real consequences if there's misunderstandings on their end. I feel like I understand that I would have to bear those consequences. So I don't think they quite have an expectation to create a space where I can fully show up as myself or share my heritage.
Initial reaction, yeah. I would say, first of all, just impressed by like what she presented, like just the whole gamut of her experience, right? But also the experience of African American women in particular, because there were definitely parts of where I had to look into what she was saying about her experience, right, as a woman. Just the whole, but then at the same time, like you said, there was just thing of like where she was capturing, and I found myself saying, like I feel you on that, right? Just like the talking about the bass, and the drum beat and the clicking, like, right, like why couldn't, like that's actually, like she said, like an inherent part of the culture, and that it's sometimes that we don't even really realize like where that's coming from, right? So I appreciated that aspect of it. So yeah, I'll just stop there.
I thought it was great. I loved it. And my first reaction was it just reminded me of conversations I've had as an HR professional, meeting with employees who are coming to let me know that they've experienced some sort of interaction with someone where they felt compelled to code switch, whether it was a person like me, a Black woman who felt that they couldn't sort of present their authentic voice because someone maybe browbeat them or even made comments about how they were speaking. And employees that I've met with over the years who are really coming to me to complain or look for support because maybe they were speaking in like their native language. And, people immediately jump to, you can't do that. Everyone can't understand that, or telling them that it's rude and whatnot. So I immediately thought about all those different things and code mixing, right? From an HR space as well, because sometimes working cross-functionally with folks, we have our jargon. And if you don't know, the jargon from a different department, they can look at you like you're an idiot. So I thought about all those different things.
But that brings up another question. I think that sometimes the idea of code switching, in my opinion, is presented in a limited way. And I don't want to ask the definition question. I don't want to ask how you define it. But I do want to ask, when was the first time you ever felt you needed to code switch in the workplace? And the reason I ask that question is because to me, the way it was introduced to me, I'd been code switching before I knew what it was. But it was introduced to me by mentors who encouraged me to be a little bit closer in proximity to whiteness as a means towards my professional success, which led me to believe that there were parts of my Blackness, parts of my culture that were liabilities to my career success rather than assets. And it took me well into my professional career to see those things as assets. And so when's the first time that you can remember that you code switched in the workplace? And what did that feel like for you?
I went to a predominantly white institution. So I think by the time that I got into my career, I had my philosophy on code switching, which is if it is a historically or majority white space or non-Black space, I automatically code switch. I go into it, I code switch, I figure out the landscape, the players, and I have experiences that either reinforce you need to code switch to protect yourself, or certain people or groups you can ease up a little bit, for lack of a better term. So I think experiences at my predominantly white institution let me know that it's not always safe for you not to. And that you will have consequences sometimes that you have to bear. And what are you, how can you protect yourself? How can you stay safe? And also it brings up the question of, are you compromising yourself? So those are things I kind of tackled as a student.
I think the first time I realized it was when, as you mentioned, mentors was in a job interview, my first job interview, real job interview, not to use, I was just really given assimilation techniques. I didn't know that it was called code switching. I just knew that it was a assimilation technique on how to present myself physically, how to show up into a space in an interview, how to speak clearly, not to use contractions. And that's, I worked, my first couple of jobs was with the United States government. And so I really had to learn how to assimilate very quickly. And then on the way home or at home, then I could be my authentic self. So in a job interview.
And what does it mean to assimilate for those that don't?
I think for me to assimilate is just to look at the lay of the land, to understand who the players are, what's the culture, the business culture, the culture of the people, and to be able to adapt. And I did that at a very, very young age, right out of college.
I'm struggling to think of a time where I actually had that encounter. I think my upbringing always encouraged me to be direct in terms of how I communicate and be myself. So I'm the same person in a lot of places, but what I find is that I'm allowed to be the person I want to present. So code switching really, to me, became popular in terms of that nomenclature fairly recently. Like I started seeing it on social media, and when I started reading about it, and I'm like, oh, now when I was looking at it, I'm seeing it as something that really sort of belonged to Black people. But the truth of the matter is, it doesn't belong to any particular group of people or gender or any type of identity. And what I find is that it occurs in so many different places for different reasons. I recall reading this story about a guy a long time ago, turn of the century even. And I can't recall if he were in sales or some other type of profession, but he often had to go and meet different people, different regions where, we didn't have this hyperconnectivity that we do now. And one of his approaches to sort of like winning these people over was to simply mirror their mannerisms. He would mirror their speech, mirror their accents, and find something that he could connect with them about. Like if he were in their home, oh, you like to play ball? I play ball. So just, doing, and that to me is more of a form of assimilation, which is not, to me, assimilation is not inclusivity. But when I think about my own experience, I can recall being in situations where I was actually experiencing something different, such as like microaggressions or just outright biases. And me being the direct communicator that I am, and maybe some people may even think confrontational, I would call it as I thought I saw it. Like, let me make sure that I understand you in a professional way, because, no one's trying to really cause real problems right in the workplace. But when I thought about like what was happening, for example, I can remember having a conversation with an individual at one employer, and the individual kept referring to me as a gal, but referred to different people as a woman, in different places. And I'm like, that's signaling, So I think about these different things, and I think about what you just said about privilege and how you don't experience code switching maybe, but I can remember sitting with an employee, a white guy, and he said something to that effect of like, I'm just being who I am, and everything that I'm saying is under attack, because, we were in the era then, I think we were calling it politically correct. You had to come correct, PC language. And in his mind, he's just making his same type of conversation, and, new people are coming in and he's thinking he's trying to establish connections, but they're finding a lot of the things that he would normally do offensive. And it was just an eye-opening conversation, So I think that, we all experience it to some degree, how we handle it or what even maybe sparks it. That's a different story.
It's interesting. I used to think that I didn't code switch. I grew up working class. The city I grew up in has been, over the past couple of decades, the most impoverished city in the United States, as well as the murder capital of the United States. So it was a lot of issues with inequality, a lot of issues with racism, a lot of issues with a lot of stuff. And my family, my dad was a steel worker, didn't graduate high school, quit school in 8th grade to work for his family. My mom didn't graduate high school, so I'm first gen college student. But I'm white, so I should fit anywhere. Well, my first experience, first of all, I didn't know what code switching was until I came across it years ago on a podcast. I mean, this is when podcasts were new. It was the first time I heard the term code switching. And it took a couple of years for me to realize, yeah, I have been doing that. Because we do often think of it as we associate it with Blackness. But I think social class plays a role in this as well, because my first experience, though I didn't have the term at the time, my first experience with code switching that I really recall was when I was in grad school. I was giving a presentation at professional meetings. And the way I had to present myself, I was expected and taught to present myself, was completely different from my authentic self. I always got lost in books, so big words and all of that was always my thing. But still, just the whole presentation, how I'm supposed to stand in front of people, how I'm supposed to just emit bigness from myself, which is not something a working class girl is ever taught to do. It was something completely new to me. And, up until, within the past couple of years, when I really started to examine my experiences with code switching, I didn't recognize it as code switching. I thought it was just, this is just what you do if you want to be a professor.
Right.
But truth is, it's code switching.
And so that actually brings us to the next question. We talk about the idea of whole self versus authentic self. And I think that some of the earlier experiences that I've had with code switching has led me to this question. Which one do you bring to work and why? Do you bring your whole self, your authentic self, or both? And what does that look like for you? Now, for folks online, we were going to do a live poll, but we're just asked that you all to think about this question as well. And I'm going to ask Brenda to put up a QR code to a live poll. And we ask that you take a little bit of a poll with us and answer the question. So for those who are here, we encourage you to scan the live code. That's our next question. Which version of yourself do you feel most comfortable bringing to work? Your whole self, your authentic self, both, or neither? So once again, we encourage you to scan the QR code, join in with us so that we can collect some live data. If you're online, we encourage you to scan that as well, and we'll check the results in a moment. But which one do you bring to work? So let's hear back from the panelists. Which do you bring to work? Your whole self, your authentic self, a combination of two, or neither?
Yeah, I would definitely say I bring a combination. I bring combination to work. And depending on the situation, depending on the circumstances, how much of that fuller self people get to see or interact with. And sometimes it could depend. We're talking about not just language, right? When we talk about code switching, it could be actually like what I'm wearing. right?
Yep.
So today, I mean, Rick can tell you, like yesterday, I asked him, I'm like, so what's the dress? And Janine, I asked her as well, right? And one, because I mean, I know we are camera, and I know that obviously people are here and also on Zoom, but I didn't want to possibly present a particular, let's say just a situation where everybody else is dressed a certain way. And I was thinking about wearing a hoodie, but it was also going to fit with the theme too, right? But today some event is going on and I'm not part of the event, but I was just like, okay, everybody else is going to be dressed up and I'd be the one guy in the hoodie and people will be like, look at this dude. So even that, right? So that's code switch, right? So, but even that, right? Just the way that I dress and choose to dress, I think speaks to myself, like who I am and like what I feel when I wear those clothes, right? And it's not a thing of like trying to present something that's inauthentic, but it's also something that I feel comfortable in. So I've been, and I'll be quiet, I've been at Oakton now like 20 years, right? So I've got some time in the game, right? So the whole notion of like what people wear when they first start at Oakton can vary differently, I would think, than when they've been here for some time. But also at the same time, when I was here, like in my first 3 to 5 years, I had colleagues, particularly white colleagues, I noticed that they got to wear certain things. And I'm sure if I was wearing those things, that it would be questionable or there would be questions raised about and I'm not saying that they weren't professional, but how it would look at me, or people would look at me, question me in terms of my choice of dress. And I realized, being here longer, that, embracing it and allowing my fuller self to come to work. And that at the same time, it doesn't speak to anything about my being a professional. And also, I think it's also a way for me to actually engage. Particularly, I'm not dressing to try to dress similar to some of my students, but they might see something that they do find familiar.
Yeah. And I've made connections with students based upon what I had on. But I want to shout out Will because Will was on the search team for that hired me, or that recommended me rather. And I code switched in the interview and Will was the only one who caught it. He was the only one who caught it. And so I said, well, I don't know if I'm gonna get this job, but I got him. I made a friend right there. And so I felt even in that moment that I was taking a risk code switching in an interview, having been there for the first time. And so I think it really does say something about who you choose to bring to certain spaces and how much of yourself you choose to insert certain spaces. Let's hear from others. We got some good data coming in from the live poll. We'll talk about that in a second, but let's hear from a few other panelists. Which one do you bring to work and why? Start with Janine and we'll go to
If you had asked me, I'm dating myself. If you'd asked me 20 years ago, I would have said neither. If you'd asked me 10 years ago, I would have said my whole self. But you're asking me now, and I'm bringing both. For me now, where I am in my confidence in my life experiences, whole self and authentic self are all encompassing. What you see is what you get. And Will, we did have that conversation yesterday about what to wear. And I told you what I was gonna dress up. And I felt really bad because I came in with my jeans, but I threw on a blazer and some nice shoes. And I said, I actually don't feel like wearing a suit, but I'm going to still be presentable in a fashion that I feel like my whole and authentic self. And so anyway, sorry, I changed my outfit. But yes, today I'm bringing my whole and my authentic self because of the experiences that I have, and actually the space in which I'm working in now, the space allows me to be my whole and authentic self unapologetically.
Definitely both, but I always bring my authentic self. I sometimes bring my whole self. When I think of my authentic self, I think of my morals. I think of the decisions I make, the actions that I have, and those are always consistent no matter where I am. That's the core of who I am. When I think of my whole self, I think of all my identities and how they intersect in those very specific and unique experiences or understandings. And I think I change that based on who I'm with and how safe I feel and how understood I feel.
I think I bring my whole self, my whole professional self. I'm at work. I'm not at home. I'm not at the doctor's office. I'm not at church. I'm not in my daughter's room disciplining her. So at work, I think I'm bringing my whole self. And I think I've always sort of brought my whole self because, again, my upbringing, I have a Southern grandma who just be yourself was kind of the mantra. So that's who I am. And what I believe is that I'm allowed to be who I am. And if people take issue with that, I will make an attempt to try to understand, like, what is it about me that's giving you an issue or that you don't understand? And I also try to think about, well, did I cause anyone to be offended by something I did or said in being who I really am? I think that we're allowed to sort of, what do we also call it? Switching your hat. So when you're in your role, you're operating and doing your thing. My professional self is the person that I feel like is also my whole self at work. There are parts of my life that simply don't belong at my job. It doesn't mean that I'm changing it to do anything other than preserve and protect what I rightfully have the ability to do so. I'm entitled to privacy. I'm entitled to manage my life the way I want to manage it. And so I think I show up as my whole self, kind of like with that being some my governing type of thought.
My answer to that question, the question, which do I bring? I would say that I do both. But I also qualify it that I live with a mental illness. So I am constantly, moment to moment, questioning who I am and am I the right person? But, thinking about what do we wear, I'm kind of punk rock. And I go for it. And, and I was thinking, about the questions about the whole self and authentic self. And I thought, I'm just going to dress punk rock and just bring myself and who I am. When I'm in a classroom, I'm going to present myself differently than when I do if I'm in a meeting or if I'm engaged in an activity related to the LGBTQIA2+ Advisory Council. All those different identities may need different parts of me. But I think overall, I try to be as authentic as I can. But that said, I think the role that we're playing, at least for me, the role that I'm playing, it does make a difference in what part of myself or how much of my identity I'm sharing with everyone around me.
Yeah, and that's why we asked the question about which do you bring to work, because professionalism is a unique construct that many believe, myself included, is rooted in white supremacy and how we act and show up in certain spaces and who has power and how we should bring ourselves to spaces in which that power exists. And so it's interesting to see some of the data come up on the polls. I know we have six, it looks like 6 people who responded. The majority of folks said both. No one in the critical regions got any answers. So no one who answered this brings their whole self or neither. Will, I don't think we heard from you. Which one do you bring?
I was saying that I would say I bring both. I like what was said earlier about, being authentic though, right? Bringing your authentic self all the time. I would definitely say that I try to do that in that regard, right? Regardless of what I'm wearing or whatever, I'm trying to be authentic. And then even with the question about professionalism, like it depends on the situation. And I don't mean about being professional, but I mean in terms of like putting myself in the classroom, like and talking to students. It was just a couple of days ago, we were talking about teach African-American literature. And we were talking about Frederick Douglass's narrative. And real quick, Covey, there's a description about a fight that he has with Covey. And Covey is the slave breaker. And he tells us that he was successful in breaking him, but then he also tells us how how he had a fight with Covey that gave him back his manhood and his inspiration for fighting for his freedom. And he tells us that after that fight, that Covey tells him that you don't want me to get my hands on you again, and or you'll get some more of that, right? And I try to make students understand, like, this is a moment where we would say in the vernacular, you don't want that smoke. Like, that's what Frederick Douglass tells us. And in his mind, he was like, yeah, you're saying it, but you don't want this smoke, right? So it's a situation, again, where that code switching is useful in the context of, again, the vernacular, and trying to make sure that students understand what they might tend to see as being something that's kind of like out of reach because of the time that it was written in, but is really saying some of the various things that we would say in just everyday speech.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Let's do a little bit of a SWOT analysis around this. I want to talk about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats as it relates to code switching. So how does code switching make you stronger? Does it make you stronger? And if so, how? In what ways?
I think for me, I would say yes, it makes me stronger because I look at it as a tool. I look at it as something that I can choose. I'm a believer that indulging or participating in another culture is a privilege. And we don't have to share it. I don't have to share that part of me. I can choose not to, because in my experience, there have been times where I've shared that and it hasn't been respected. It hasn't been understood. So I see it as a tool, one, to try to get some form of safety, but also a tool for me to have a choice.
I think the strength of code switching, I agree with you, Kamari. It's a really interesting tool, and that not everybody has the opportunity to use or experience. However, I also think code switching has its weaknesses too, because if you're in a space for a really long time where you do desperately want to be your authentic and whole self, and you just can't, it's exhausting. Or if you, as I said before, I think, like I said, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, I wasn't able, I didn't have the confidence to show up, or maybe not the confidence, but I didn't have the trust. I didn't feel safe to show up as one or the other, or sometimes neither. It's exhausting, and it makes you question who you are and why you are and where you are. So I think that it can also be a weakness.
I'll add on to that weakness. I feel like the weakness of code switching is no matter what you do, you can't control how other people view you. You can't control that person viewing your identity as unworthy. So as much as I code switch, that doesn't ensure that I get what I deserve or that I feel safe.
Yeah, that part. Yep.
Excellent, Kamari. The strength in it, just as Kamari described it, maybe you have an opportunity and you recognize you're in a situation, so you leverage it as a tool to sort of accomplish what you want to accomplish. The weakness of it, of course, is the detrimental impacts it has on some folks that are really internalizing why they're in a certain situation, having to go through what they're going through and just really feeling, both oppressed and suppressed by the situation, that they can't be who they are because it's going to have a detrimental impact on their ability to experience certain freedoms and, their livelihood and, opportunities, I think, would be to really learn how to navigate interpersonal relationships in a way that is respectful to both who you are as a person, but also the individual or individuals with whom you're interacting at the time you're interacting. And threats, again, threats would be, some people are really internalizing it. So something that you said, Janine, made me think about a meme or skit, I think, on TikTok someone had sent me. Everyone sends me all the HR stuff. So there's a lot of HR stuff that people, because employers say one thing, but we know the people in an organization are doing another. Employer says we welcome everybody, but the people in the organization are saying you are not welcome here, and I got this one video skit someone sent me, and it's like, how do I say bleep off professionally, right? And it's like, and then it's like a whole thread, because it's like swipe, and whatever. And it's
Per our conversation.
for my last email.
Yeah.
So you know what I'm talking about, right? And I should also mention my grandma, raised a fighter. So she's like, no, you're gonna go and you want to go back and fight. So it's like, I think that, again, makes me kind of not feel the weight as I hear some people. Not to say that I don't experience things, but I just think maybe my views on how I need to conduct myself just makes me feel like I don't participate in certain things because I feel like I'm so self-directed with certain things in life. That's all.
Yeah.
But I think that when an individual is really experiencing like emotional distress, it's important for them to take care of self. So you may need to talk to someone, right? But in the workplace specifically, you do probably want to reach out to your human resource department. And it's not a plug for HR. I say that because there are other behaviors that are going on that's triggering some of the whole phenomena behind I need to talk different, act differently. We know that people deal with folks all the time, whether someone says, well, I'm being micromanaged, or I'm being, kind of left out, I'm being overlooked, I'm being, all these different bad behaviors or poor behaviors. You pick, I don't care, that they're experiencing for someone who's probably in a position of authority, or someone who's connected to someone in a position of authority where their opinion matters. And so they've internalized that to say, I need to assimilate, I need to act differently, I can't be who I am, et cetera, And I'll say one last thing. I do want to say sometimes the authentic self or whole self, that thing to me can be questionable. For example, I have a young cousin. He talks in slang all the time, not even so much popular hip hop, things he makes up, and I kind of like it. It's really cool. There's a rapper, Little Scrappy.
Yes.
Scrappy he's got his own little kind of dialect, right? Or way of talking, not even dialect, but he adds a little something on the end of his words. And I think it's funny because it really became popular. If you grew up in my era, it was E40. And E40 is the person who provided that. To me, it's Snoop Dogg adapted it, but I think they call it Izzle. So you add that to everything. Like everyone knows Snoop Dogg says for shizzle, right? Which means for sure. Or some people say for sheezy. Means the same thing. But I grew up like in 7th and 8th grade. I listened to E40, and that's who, to me, popularized that. So like I can remember with my friends, we were doing it. We thought we were cool. Like, hey. Now, did I talk to my teachers like that? I did. And then my teacher saying, what are you saying? Then I'd be like, oh, blah, 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 So going back to how to communicate to someone so that they understand me, I don't think that's code switching per se. I just think that sometimes you adapt to be heard and just to be clear.
Something you said made me think about something I struggled with for a little bit of time. When you were talking about opportunities, you were saying that it presents an opportunity to connect and communicate with different people. And I think that's how I justified it myself. I'm like, oh, I'm learning how to communicate with different people and connect with different people. And I love connecting with people. So I'm like, oh yeah, that's a superpower. That's a great thing. But then it became that I was the one expected always to do that. No one was ever expected to do that for me. And I think that's when we're playing into white supremacy.
Yeah, that's for me when it became a threat. It became a threat to my existence as a human being. And some of my earliest experiences with code switching, I felt like I needed for the people in the room to know that I was one of the good guys, which I later realized came from that suppression that I had experienced to be different because you want to appeal and get closer to, again, closer in proximity to whiteness as a means for career success. So I became so fed up with it that I began to weaponize my code switching. And I brought myself to environments for the sole purpose to make you uncomfortable. So if you ask me to wear something on the same day as everybody else, I'm gonna wear something totally different. I'm gonna put my kicks on. See, 10 years ago, when I was wearing kicks to work, I had a different experience. With human resources, I had a different experience with my who I was reporting to at the time. Now it's cool. Now it's all the rage. Now everybody does it. And that's why code switching is threatening, because it can also be co-opted. I was doing it as a method of survival for myself. I needed to prove to myself, to show myself that I could bring myself to any space and still be successful. However, because I was so upset and angry about where I was, I wanted to make everybody in the room uncomfortable. And so I began to weaponize it in a way that was detrimental to my own mental and spiritual health. And so when I asked that question, whole self, authentic self, or both, a lot of that comes from my own experience having to be conscious about how I show up in spaces for me and not for the benefit of everybody else. How comfortable do I feel being today? I had on jeans earlier and it was pretty much the reverse. I didn't feel comfortable in my jeans. I didn't feel good. I got to be committed to this all day. I really don't like this outfit. I feel good about what I'm wearing right now. And I think that bothered me all the way to work, all the way through the fashion show. It was like, well, maybe I should have worn the jeans. Maybe I should have did this. Maybe I should have did that. But I think that I had to learn that if I'm going to code switch for anybody, it needs to be for myself. It needs to be for the benefit of how I feel in a particular space to be safe at the time, and not for the comfort or betterment or anyone else who's around.
Thank you for that, Kamari. I want to say one thing. I totally understand what you just said. I have also had the conversation where, in an individual's attempt to connect to their Black coworkers, those Black coworkers were upset because they felt like they were being mocked and parodied because that person was trying to connect, like using their slang. And we see it still. So it's almost kind of like there's maybe like a little bit of a double standard out there, right? To like who's allowed to maybe, and to what degree you can code switch in certain groups. That's why I say be yourself, right?
Right. Yeah.
Because I'm not going to give so much of myself in any particular thing that I don't want to give. If I may give you too much, you might be like, too much, shut up. Like, you know what I mean? Like, Camesha, I don't even want to hear that. Or, be yourself, you know what I'm saying? And don't apologize for it. There's this acronym I was taught about fear, false evidence appearing real. And it speaks to kind of like the anxiety that sort of arises, or the angst that arises out of our imagination and how we think someone's perceiving us. Don't know what someone else is thinking. And to something else earlier you said, you can't change it. That's actually something I started raising my kids with super early. Like, do this. You can't change the way somebody else is going to view you. So do this anyway. This is what you're supposed to do. Do this. You know what I mean? And so who owns the rules? Who's the gatekeeper? I don't know. Show up as yourself. And I think that's the real strength.
We got just a few minutes left. So once again, we appreciate everyone who's in the room, everyone who's on the Zoom. I want to leave with a question that hopefully you can answer from your own personal perspective to offer for those who may need to hear it. What is one thing that I'm going to switch it up a little bit on this last question. What is one thing that you do every day to affirm your identity, to affirm who you are as an individual? What's one thing that you do every day for self-affirmation?
Self-affirmation. That's pretty deep, man. But I mean, not to go too deep, but definitely one thing I personally, again, as you asked, is I just thank God for another day. I mean, just that, thank God for another day. I have a Bible verse that comes up, I do that. And then organ in the back. Right? So I want people to talk about, yeah, he was trying to preach. I'm far from a preacher, but I'm just saying that's something I do every day. And then just, thinking about my day and just trying to embrace it. But yeah, I would say that's really it. That right there is like something I do every day. So yeah.
I listen to my music. On the way here, my music's on, and the artists that I personally choose before I show up to spaces where it's majority non-Black, it's always artists that it's not like a code, but it's a cultural thing that is just understood. Like my favorite rapper is Andre 3000. And it's because when Andre says something, you got to have that feeling. You had to experience it to understand what he's talking about, or it doesn't make sense. And there's that level of gatekeeping that I'm like, oh, I feel at home. I feel like you understand me, you see me. So I listen to my music. But I do have some action items if we have time. Okay, really quick. Don't assume, especially when we're talking about being in these professional spaces, don't assume that the way you feel is the way your coworkers feel. I've been in conversations where we're talking about celebrities, specifically Black celebrities, and I'm like, I don't feel like you, but you think I feel like you, and you making me uncomfortable. So that's one. And your friends shouldn't look like you. Your friends shouldn't come from the same place as you. There should be some diversity in your friendship. But I also understand being in these spaces and saying, I need my friends to look like me. And I think I'm in that position, but also there's so much diversity within communities that your friends shouldn't believe the same things that you believe. Your friends shouldn't have the same religion as you. You should always have diversity represented in the people surrounding you.
I was just going to say really quickly, I stand in silence, giving thanks, realizing that life is a vapor. Rick, you'll appreciate this. The commute, you see everything happening, all these accidents, don't know what happens on the person's end, There's an accident right before I got to work today. I took my camera out because the police told me I couldn't turn into the campus because they were cleaning up some debris, and I just sat there. And I do not like to sit behind the wheel. And I'm like, I'm in a position where I could get arrested because then I'll start, where could I go? Like kind of thing. So this isn't good. And as I'm sitting there and I'm like, be grateful, be thankful. I saw other accidents in my 50+ mile commute. So it's like, be grateful, be thankful. So that's kind of my daily affirmation, realizing that nothing is guaranteed. I think there's the scripture that says, you got enough worry for today. It's got its own problems. Don't worry about tomorrow. Be present. Being present is so critical. It's actually one of the foundations, right, of these interpersonal communication skills we're supposed to have as professionals, right? Being present is major. So I try to be present. I try to be mindful. And that's how I sort of affirm, like I reflect, like, man, did that come out right? I said this. Did I say that? Wait, did I said the wrong thing, like the wrong word. And that totally has a different meaning. I got to go back and send an email. You know what I mean? Like, so I just kind of do that. Like the silence is just really needed because there's just so much going on right now. We're just in a different time right now. Technology puts us, and globalization puts us just in this different position. There's not a cheat sheet to handle every life encounter. Being yourself, trying to be a good person. We all have different definitions of what that means. I think that's really important, so that's how I affirm who I am.
Similar to listening to your music, in me, it's part music, but it's also the clothes I wear. Most of the time I'll wear jeans and a t-shirt if I'm at home, but this is what I'm most comfortable in. This feels like me. And every time I dress like this, I feel like me. Every time I wear jeans and t-shirt, I mean, they're comfortable, but they're also not me. So I wear them for comfort because I'm lounging around the house, or I'm grading, or I just don't feel like going through my closet that morning. But I use my clothes to represent who I am and feel good in my own skin. And I can feel a difference when I'm dressed like this versus when I've got jeans and a t-shirt on. I'm less questioning. You know, I mentioned, because of my mental illness, I question every day, every moment of every day who I am. But when I'm dressed the way I like to dress, I'm just so comfortable in my own skin that I can let some of the other stuff go and be more present and feel more powerful.
Every morning, I just listen to myself, my inner self, and ask myself, like, what are you trying to say? It's either me or God, you know, just like, what are you trying to say today? And then at the end of the day, I ask myself, did you answer the question? Did you live whatever the message came from me today? And then I do, like you do, Camesha, reflect. And I said, did I do so-and-so, or did I offend, or did I come off a certain way? And I just kind of sit with that, kind of like having this inner check. That's how I affirm myself every day, by just listening.
I love that, the inner check. Yeah, excellent. Well, listen, I just want to take a moment to say thank you so much to our panelists for being a part of this wonderful discussion. It's not easy to talk about these things, and it's not easy to talk about our experiences, especially in a public recorded setting. So to all of those that are listening, who are questioning about what this means within the context of your life, I would really pay attention to some of the words that were offered here, some of the things that are done to affirm their identities and themselves each and every day, some of the recommendations that were given, but also to remember that each of us deserves the option to bring yourself to work in whatever way you choose. We should be in an environment that's affirming to multiple identities, but also to the state in which that identity shows up at that time. Sometimes who you decide to bring to work, or the version of yourself, or how the extent of that version, is contingent upon what happened to you that morning, what you've been with, what you've seen, what you've experienced. And I think that we all have to provide a little bit more grace around how we show up in the spaces to do our work. And I appreciate all of the gracefulness that you have offered in your remarks today. So thank you very much for being a part of the Critical Conversations. We appreciate it. For anybody who's in the room, let's give a round of applause for our panelists. And thank you, everybody, for being on Zoom. Once again, the podcast will be available next week. You can download it on all of the major platforms. Also, if you have questions or suggestions on topics, send those questions or suggestions to critconpod@oakton.edu. That's critconpod@oakton.edu. Thank you, everybody, and we'll see you again next month for our next Critical Conversations. Have a great day.